insights often occur when you least expect them. On Transformative Leadership Conversations, they're at the heart of every episode. Hi, I'm your host, Winnie da Silva, and together we're exploring a spectrum of leadership themes through the compelling stories and insights of seasoned leaders and prominent experts. So, in each episode, you'll walk away with inspiration, strategies, and tools to enhance your leadership, build effective teams, and lead thriving organizations. The episode today and the theme for this month is going to be a little different. 20 years ago this month, I turned down 2 job offers, quit my job, and what I had with me was an 18-month-old baby, a husband between startups, and a mortgage. And honestly, looking back, it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. So in today's episode, I want to pull back the curtain on this crazy career adventure and share a few examples of and stories of what I've learned along the way. And the best part to start, why? Why do I do this work? Why is it important? Okay, so while on the surface, the work is about helping people reach their business objectives, create better products and services, get promoted, transition into new roles, and learn how to communicate so that they can accomplish all these things. That's the outside of what I do. And it's extremely important part of my work. But what's equally important, and maybe even more important, is what happens on the inside. Okay, so on average, people spend about 1/3 of their lives at work, which translates, get this, into roughly 90,000 hours over our lifetime. That's a lot of hours. And what makes work difficult and challenging in all of those hours? People. Working with, managing, and leading people is extremely hard. And that's where this opportunity for real growth comes in. So we often feel like other people are the problem. They're getting in our way, they're slowing us down, or they're just downright being annoying. But of course, the real truth is that the only people we can actually change is ourselves. So great leadership starts on the inside and works its way out. Most leaders want to be the kind of leader who gets great business results and creates workplaces where people can contribute their best value and grow so that they can become great leaders themselves. And this also extends beyond leadership. It's about enabling people to become the best people they can be. So, this is my intention every time I sit down with an executive, work with his team, or facilitate a leadership development program. Because leadership is an awesome responsibility and it has the potential to bring so much good into the world. Okay, so a little bit about how my background shaped me into who I am today and the executive coach and leadership strategist that I am today. So people frequently ask me, is this where you thought you'd end up? And the answer is clearly no. But okay, let's rewind for a second. Many of you know that I started out my career as a social worker. One of the core principles I learned in graduate school was around systems thinking, which is the idea that if people are to successfully change, we must consider their environment or the system that's around them. Because we are all heavily influenced by our environment, our culture, other people, and our circumstances. And this theory really shaped my approach when I moved into business consulting and organizational change, which is all about equipping people to change within an organization to bring about business results. So, working at Arthur Andersen Business Consulting after I was a social worker was one of the most consequential moves of my career. So, within 5 years, I had 4 different job titles and I switched from back of office to client facing work. I also got married. And in those 5 years, I learned discipline, rigor, critical thinking, business acumen, and how to work successfully with clients. I learned how to be part of the sales process. I learned how to quickly work within various client cultures and organizations, adjust to what was needed, and to be able to respond in the moment. These lessons were really essential when I started my business later on. Really, for me, it was a business boot camp. But at first, making that psychological and cognitive switch from working with crack addicted kids in New York City Two, we're meeting with and working with CEOs in the boardroom. It was a big one. And one tool that helped me make that transition was honestly imagining myself in the role of quote unquote Winnie the consultant. Using the acting skills that I had from high school and college theater, I visualized myself in that role, walking into a boardroom, figuring out where I was going to sit, who was going to be in the room, what would the room was going to look like, what I would say. You know what? This took the pressure off from having to be fully that person yet. I talk more about this idea in my podcast conversation with Gina Osborne on her podcast show, Making Maverick Moves. So check it out. So after Arthur Andersen collapsed, remember Enron, my next and last quote unquote real job was as the head of learning development for one of my clients when I was with Arthur Andersen. Now, I already knew the CEO, but I had to convince the head of HR to hire me because guess what? I didn't have the specific experience in learning and development. So, yet another opportunity for me to do something I wasn't kind of qualified to do. But man, did I have a vision for that role. And when I finally got the job, I threw myself into creating an incredible leadership development program in close collaboration and partnership with Columbia Business School and specifically Grant Ackerman, who was the faculty director of that program. So after a few years after that, I had my first daughter. And I realized pretty quickly that doing this job in that way and being a mom wasn't sustainable for me in that season of my life. So I started looking for other jobs. I thought maybe I could find one that was. And I got two job offers. And in fact, one was paying $50,000 more than I was currently making. But when I asked about flexibility, and remember, this was like 18 years ago when flexibility was not a thing, they said no. And I just couldn't do it. I thought, you know what, there's got to be a better way to do this work, to do the work that I love and still spend some time with my kid. So I turned down both job offers and I quit my job. It really felt like I was jumping off a cliff. So I know you're not supposed to say this or admit it, but I actually really didn't have a plan. I'm not happy. The jobs that are out there aren't offering what I need. And so I just thought, I'll give it a try. Worst case scenario, I'll just find another job, right? And I'll never forget hearing my father in law through the phone as he was talking to my husband as he was explaining the situation. And he said, "Is she crazy? What is she thinking?" And my husband's response was this: "She just wants to work and she wants to spend time with Kavita." And honestly, that's probably the reason that I did it. He gave me that push in a way to jump off that cliff. Of course, he was coming with me. And he believed that I could do it. And what I didn't know is that that jump started my lifelong work cultivating leadership in others and honestly, also in myself. Okay, so there were a couple of early struggles and small wins, right? So after quitting my job in 2005, I was incredibly lucky that my old employer agreed to hire me as a consultant to manage the same leadership development program that I designed. So fast forward, still working with them and trying to get other clients as well. Fast forward to 2007, I had another baby in September. And then, of course, 2008, the financial crisis hit. And it was scary. I wasn't making enough money. And I thought, you know what? Maybe now is the time I should quit and I should find another job. But again, my husband encouraged me to stick with it. And he said, you know what? You haven't been doing it that long. Keep going. I really think that it's going to work out. And again, that kind of belief and vision made all the difference to keep me going. But still, I had self doubts. And I do all along the way and have all along the way. Because at that time, especially, I was thinking, how am I going to build something that's satisfying, financially sustainable, and gives me the flexibility that I wanted? I thought, maybe I'm asking for too much. But over the years, my work kept evolving, it kept changing. And I was able to be successful as I went along. But things always change, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of curiosity. Because every couple of years, I tend to get this inner restlessness every couple of years where I ask myself this: what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And what can I do that will stretch me, keep me learning, and make things a little bit more interesting? So in 2020, when the global pandemic hit, the world stopped, of course, and most of my work paused. And I suddenly had a lot more time to think. And where did my mind go? I thought, you know what? I'm going to start a podcast. The dream of starting a podcast had been kind of sitting in the back of my mind for really quite a long time, for several years. And right then, 2020, I knew this is my moment. If I don't do it now, it's never going to happen. So while everything came to a halt in March, by December, I'd launched my podcast. And that sounds really easy, but it wasn't. And during that time, it was when my husband said, "Winnie, you're going to be tempted to hire people to do this for you." And he was right. That's exactly what I was planning on doing, thinking I need help figuring this out because I don't no idea what I'm doing. But he told me, don't do that. You need to learn how to do this by yourself. You need to figure out what you really want to say to the world. You need to figure out how you want to say it. And then when you're ready to bring people in to help, you'll know exactly what it is that you want. So reluctantly, I knew that he was right. So I did it myself, mostly, except for towards the end where I needed some help with the technical parts and getting this thing launched. But for the most part, I learned it on my own. You know, the design, the music, the content, the editing, the guests, the production, all of it. And it was really hard. And I was, not surprisingly, I was extremely impatient with myself. And I was thinking, Winnie, why is this taking so long? Why can't you figure this out faster? But then in December, when I was about to launch, I was like looking back and realizing, what is this? It'd only been like 5 months since I started this. Why am I beating myself up? This is like kind of amazing. Was it perfect out of the gate? No, it wasn't. But for me, I love experimenting and I love trying new things. Planning everything out for months sounds like torture for me, and it kind of was, even though I needed to do it, right? Because what I'd rather do is mess up and then fix it. And that's because that's how I learn best. And that's how the podcast was born. So over time, in doing this podcast, I really learned a lot. Most importantly, the podcast continuously forces me to articulate what I know and what I believe and what I've learned. You know, to put my ideas into words for people to understand, for them to use, and for them to learn from. And when I started, it was mostly about bringing other people onto the show. And I still absolutely love that. It was a way to showcase other people that other people may not have heard about or heard from who I thought were amazing. And that was great. I also use the podcast as a way to explore leadership topics myself, to clarify my own thinking, to organize how I think about leadership, and to share it in a way that will help others. Okay, so here I am 20 years later. Yikes, that's a really long time. So, what I'd like to do, if you're up for it, is share a few points of clarity that I've gained and stories that I can share that connect to those points along the way. So, I have four, not 20, and I'm sure I could think of 20, but I only have four today. And here they are. Number one, people work with you because of you. Number two, learning requires us to step outside of ourselves. Number three, sometimes saying no is more important than saying yes. And number four, always take the long view. Okay, so we'll start with number one. People work with you because of you. So when people buy a service or a product, even, they're buying from you because they like you, trust you, and they feel connected to you. Now, of course, whatever it is that you're selling has to be good. Like it's got to be good, but that's table stakes. That's like the minimum. That's the minimum threshold that people are looking for. Because what really matters to people when they buy from you is their relationship with you and what they think about you. So when I started, I mostly focused on HR and leadership consulting projects. So designing leadership development programs and designing HR core processes, things like that. I was working with a long-term client. I'll call her Juliet on all kinds of projects that I just mentioned. And one day she asked me, Winnie, I need to hire a couple of executive coaches. Do you know any? And I promptly introduced her to a few that I really liked and trusted. So about 6 months later, she came back to me and said this. So, Winnie, do you do executive coaching? Because I like the coaches we're working with now. They're fine, but we'd rather just work with you. So if you could do the coaching, that would be better. So I said, okay, sure, I can do that. Because she wasn't really asking me. She was just kind of telling me, right, that she wanted me to do this. And I had never formally conducted an executive coaching engagement, but she trusted me and she knew my work. So I figured it out on my own. I read the books, I did the research, I talked to amazing people, and I just designed a program. I realized, and in fact, going through this process, I realized that I had almost all of the puzzle pieces I needed to be a good executive coach. What I hadn't done is just put them all together. So that experience was a huge lesson for me. Building deep, trusted relationships with clients, developing that trusted advisor partnership is what people really want. And it's what I want too. And it's those kinds of client relationships that have the biggest impact. Okay, number two, learning requires us to step outside of ourselves. For my work, it is essential to see things from someone else's perspective. Easy to say, hard to do, right? Because we all only truly live inside of our own heads. And it's the only perspective we really know. It takes discipline and practice to really say, I'm going to step outside my own point of view and try to see this from someone else's perspective. Now, while this can be really difficult, it's also one of the most powerful abilities we have as humans. It's where empathy, understanding, and connection begins. So I often ask myself and my clients, what are some ways we can generate curiosity about the people around us to understand them better and understand their perspectives? Now, we don't have to feel curious. We can start by acting curious. And to do that, you can ask thoughtful, open ended questions. And these can be a forcing mechanism so that we can shift out of judgment, disconnection, and into genuine connection and understanding. So try doing this. Say what you think and the reasoning behind it, and then in turn, ask meaningful, open ended questions to understand what the other person really thinks and their reasoning behind it. This is called advocacy and inquiry. Other questions you can ask: how does this person learn best? What are their personality preferences or natural communication styles? And how can I use this knowledge to connect with them? Now, whether you're leading a team, building a business, or supporting someone else's growth, understanding how other people work, learn, and how they're different from you is absolutely essential. Okay, so I have a client that I've worked with for a really long time, and we're still in touch and work together here and there. His communication style and how he thinks is very different from me. For example, he's an introvert and he thinks before he talks, unlike me, where I think while I'm talking. So when he speaks, it's very deliberate, well informed, and thoughtful. And he also thinks, interestingly enough, by drawing, visualizing ideas before articulating them. So when we worked together, I had to adjust my own natural communication style. So I'm energetic. I love bouncing ideas back and forth, brainstorming, building on each other, sometimes interrupting, right? Well, that approach works beautifully with some clients, but this approach would never work with him, right? And if I worked with him in this way, it might shut him down and I'd miss what he was saying. And to say the least, it would not be a very good coaching experience. So I learned to reel it in. I'd ask a question and then I'd stop and I'd sit in that silence, sometimes for a long time, because I knew he was thinking, right? I knew there was something going on. It's just that there wasn't any talking, and that was okay, right? Because for many of us, we can feel really uncomfortable in that silence. But for him, it was essential. And so he'd sit quietly and he'd think, and then maybe he'd start sketching. And then when he was finally ready to speak, what he said was gold because, again, it was thoughtful, grounded, and specific. And that's where the work happened because once he was able to articulate what he was thinking, I could then respond, ask another question, push his thinking, and help him to go deeper. That experience reminds me every time that you have to get to know who you're working with. What does this person need? How do they best learn and process information? How can I adjust my own approach so that the conversation and the relationship can be as productive and impactful as possible? Okay, number three, sometimes saying no is more important than saying yes. I love this one. Okay, saying no to clients is hard for me. Maybe it's because of my Midwestern roots. Maybe it's because I was a social worker. Maybe it's my personality. Okay. But it has not been easy for me to say no to clients, and it still really isn't. But I've learned how to say no, and it's really been an important part of my journey because sometimes doing the right thing means walking away, even from the clients I like and respect and I enjoy working with, or walking away from a new client, even if it means losing money. So let me share a story. I had a client, I'll call her Carrie, that I worked with for a really long time. I knew her really well. And we'd worked together on a lot of projects over the years. But there was one project that I started, and as I got into it, I realized it was not a good fit. Not only was it not a good fit, they shouldn't have been hiring a consultant to do this work at all for a couple of reasons. It needed to be done internally, and it was not clearly defined at all. They really didn't know what they wanted. And I just knew it didn't make sense. So I had to talk to Carrie about it. I also knew she was already a little bit frustrated because she didn't think that I was making enough progress. Okay. So it was not going to be an easy conversation. So I sat down with her and I said, listen, this is not a good project for me to be working on. I don't think you need a consultant to do this work. And I'm not sure that this project is well defined. And I think you really need to take some time to figure out exactly what you want. That's what I said. And it was hard. But you know what? At the end of the day, she was okay with it. And I think in some ways she respected me even more for that conversation. Now, before that conversation, I practiced it a ton with a few of my colleagues. I spent a lot of time analyzing why I thought I shouldn't do it, what was holding me back from having this conversation with her and all of that, right? But in the end, it was definitely the right thing to do. I have another example that just happened only a few months ago. So I was meeting with a new client for the first time. They were a big company, and the CEO wanted me to do some team development work with her executive team. So now I'm very clear when I'm working with clients that when I do team development work, for it to be successful, I need to meet with the entire team, and they have to buy in to doing that work and to doing that work with me. And once we cross that hurdle, if they do want to do that work and they agree to it, then I interview everybody on the team. I do a team assessment. And that really is a kickstart for this kind of work to be successful. If you skip these steps, this kind of work is not successful. That's just really the bottom line. Okay. So I explained all of this to the CEO, and she pushed back. She really doubted that this was necessary. And again, I shared why it is essential, that skipping these two steps would jeopardize, any work that we might do together. And really, you might have short-term, some short-term gains, but skipping this would really jeopardize the long-term gains. So I didn't get the work. And later, I was actually privileged enough to actually find out that the reason I didn't get that work was because I insisted on those conditions. I also learned that the work they did with the other consultant that they ended up hiring was not sustainable. There was no follow through, there was no long term impact. So, what surprised me was how good I felt about it. Not just because I'd stood up for what I thought was the right thing for the client, even if they didn't see it that way at the time, but because I realized that they simply weren't ready for the kind of work that I do, at least not yet. And that's okay, because in some ways, that no was a forcing mechanism to indicate that this wasn't yet a good match. And it's critical to know that, which is why it's really important to know when and how to say no. Okay, number 4, always take the long view. Learning to say no is also connected to this next reflection. Take the long view. So, in other words, don't make decisions based on what feels good or easy in the moment, but always aim for what's going to be the best all the way down the road. Take the long view is what builds trust with your clients. So, when I'm working with clients, there's usually an immediate need, especially with executive coaching, something urgent that brings them to work with me in the first place. Maybe they need to get better at something specific, improve a relationship, prepare for a promotion, succeed in a new role, any of those things. Whatever it is, there is a burning platform. There's a reason to change. Because let's be honest, we rarely, almost never change unless we absolutely have to. So, in other words, urgency is really good. It gives us something concrete to work with. But the way I think about coaching and leadership and team development is that while we address the immediate need, I'm always looking at the long view, and I help my clients see it the same way. For example, many years ago, I worked with a client, I'll call her Jackie, who was having a really hard time with a particular colleague. Now, it's easy in those moments to think, and we all do this, that person is the problem. How do I fix them? But as I said earlier, and as we all know to be true, we can only change ourselves. So the real question becomes this: what do I need to understand or change within myself to make this relationship better? That's the first part. The second part is this: it's all about self awareness. And the question you want to ask yourself are these: why am I reacting this way? What are the stories that I'm telling myself about the other person, about myself, or about the way things are that are potentially driving my reactions? Okay, so in this case, Jackie realized, this is really interesting, that this colleague of hers reminded her of her brother. He acted and spoke to her in similar ways that triggered feelings that she had when she was growing up. And once she uncovered this insight, she was able to separate this person from her brother. And from there, we brainstormed ways she could approach this work relationship with a totally different and fresh perspective. How could she get to know him as a person, for example? What kinds of questions could she ask him about his life outside of work? What did he care about? Over time, she started to understand what I call his quote unquote currency, what he cared about and what mattered to him. So Jackie decided to take him out to lunch, and they got to know each other as people. And she discovered that he loved wine, and so did she. So she bought him a really nice bottle of wine, and that is what shifted their relationship. That helped move them beyond the back and forth and all the things that were getting them stuck. The third part of this, always taking the long view, is seeing how today will help you tomorrow. So, the question you want to ask yourself in this kind of situation is this: what if this situation isn't just about fixing the immediate problem, but it's about building the leadership skills that I'll rely on for the rest of my career? Whenever you're working through a challenge at work, you're not just solving for one immediate problem, you're actually building capacity to handle similar situations like this in the future. You're learning how to work with people like that. You're learning how to figure out how to work with someone and be your best self when your boss is frustrating you, when your colleagues are difficult, when your efforts aren't being fully recognized. Whatever it is, the list goes on, right? These are all important immediate challenges that you need to deal with right now, right? But they are also opportunities to build something bigger, your leadership muscle. So just like going to the gym, you start small, 2 pound weight, 5, 10. You build your strength over time. And that's what this work is: building leadership muscle so that as your challenges get harder and more complex, which hopefully they will, right? You'll get stronger. You build even more muscle. Every challenge you face skillfully builds your leadership muscle for your next leadership challenge. So, those are my 4 reflections that have stayed with me for over 20 years in this work. People work with you because of you. Learning requires us to step outside of ourselves. Number 3, saying no is sometimes more important than saying yes. And lastly, always take the long view. So, while I'd like to think I've got another 20 years ahead of me, we'll see. When I think about what's next, my answer is maybe still the same. I don't know. But what I have been thinking about a lot lately is my own very small role in the world right now and what it means to put a spotlight on what good leadership looks like. To help leaders not just become more effective and good at what they do, but be truly great, both from a business perspective and a human one. Because I don't think we have to choose between the two. I don't believe we have to sacrifice kindness, empathy, integrity in order to build ambitious, high performing, thriving businesses and organizations and teams. I believe we can do both. I also think that leadership itself is in a moment of crisis, or maybe call it a moment of deep reflection on what good leadership is and what it should look like. And maybe just as importantly, what it should not look like. So that's a bit about me, what I've learned, what I enjoy, and why I do this work. So here's to the next 20 years. Thank you so much for being part of this journey, because you all have. And here's to what comes next. Thank you for listening to this episode of Transformative Leadership Conversations. If you're ready to take your leadership to the next level or empower your teams for success, I'm here to help. Reach out to me directly at winnie@winifred.org or check out my website at www.winniedasilva.com to learn more about my work in coaching executives, developing critical leadership skills, working with clients to build effective teams. You can also find me on Substack and LinkedIn, and now on YouTube. Because you are always welcome to take a seat at the table where every conversation has the potential for transformative change.